People who have been written into someone's will that wasn't family or a close friend. What's your story? A wealthy parishioner in the church where I was organist, music director greatly appreciated my music making and found it to be uplifting. When this kind and generous lady passed, she left me, much to my surprise, a generous amount of money with thoughtful words of gratitude. Additionally, she donated a substantial amount as an endowment for the church's music fund. Sort of cheating, but my bio father is a long time estranged from me. And my mum, obviously. I didn't have anything to do with his side of the family apart from an old friend of my mum's, maybe a second cousin to somebody in his family. Anyway, I never really thought about him or his side of the family at all and was very happy with the dad I had and my half-sister and brothers. Maybe a year ago I was sitting working from home and my sister called saying this old ex-family friend had reached out to her on Facebook or some other social media and asked if I could call her. I called her and she said my bio uncle needed to speak to me. Long story short, bio nan had recently passed and left me a decent chunk of cash. I had no memory of this person and don't even know her name, but apparently I was the first grandchild and she'd bequeathed me something in her will. All I had to do was send my bank details over and he'd send me the money. Sounded very suspicious, obviously. He sent a load of pics of me as a kid with my bio dad and bio uncle, aunt and nan that I'd obviously never seen, and then transferred me this money that day. It was actually quite nice to speak to him. He was very guarded about saying anything bad about my mum and was surprised to hear she died, and we ended up having quite a decent chat. TBH, I haven't spoken to him in a while, so might send him a text now. The money just went on paying a tax bill annoyingly. Not me but our neighbors growing up. They took care of another elderly neighbor that lived next door to them, caring for her and the property. The woman did not have any family, and when she passed she left the house to the neighbors. It was a really nice house too. Not actually in the will. But I had met my grandmother's curator friend a few times and talked about some random museum stuff, as well as some stuff I had accumulated over the years, including my coin collection. A few years later she had died from cancer, and my grandmother gave me a box that her friend had told her to pass on to me. The friend's grandfather, possibly great-grandfather, had been the Mexican consul back in the 1850s or thereabouts, and he had collected a bunch of Mexican coins from that era. The box also had some other coins that the friend had accumulated. But the Mexican stuff is incredible. Small denomination silver coins meant for circulation that he pulled out basically fresh from the mint. Normally you find these coins practically worn down to blanks because silver is so soft. But these things are pristine. One of these days I'll probably look into auctioning them off. I knew a woman in her 80s who had led a fascinating life. She was a friend of my wife's grandfather. When she died, it was learned that she had no siblings, no first cousins, not much in the way of family. She had a will and had remembered that she had a grandniece who lived across the country. They had met one time when the niece was a child. She left that niece nearly $1 million. She also donated $100,000 to a community college theater department. My man's trying to get in a will, lol. Interesting topic. Can't wait to read the stories. My mom grew up on the prairies, in an area that was difficult for her parents to farm. This was in the 1930s to 40s. The next farm neighbor, Fred, a bachelor, was a good, helpful friend to the family. I met him once when I was a small child. When Fred died in the 80s, he left shares in his estate to my mother, my sisters, my aunt, her 2 sons, and me, but not my aunt's adopted daughter. There was no money willed to any of the other 6 siblings in my mother's family. There was a monetary bequest to my brother, worth more than the shares left to the women of my family. Seems strange that a kind neighbor from decades before would only remember a few people from the family he befriended. Fred had black hair. My grandma and grandpa both had red hair. 6 of their children had red hair. My mother and aunt had black hair. My brother, apparently, looked very similar to Fred. Grandpa had to spend a significant amount of time away from the farm in the mid-1930s, especially in the few years that surrounded the births of my mother and my aunt. So, Fred may have been more than a kind neighbor. He might have been my secret grandfather. I once worked with a Holocaust survivor. She was 5 when it started and she hid in the mountains with other kids from her class for 2-ish years. Many got sick and died. She did not have any family left in the USA when she was dying and told me she was going to put me in her will. I told her she could do that, but I couldn't accept the money. I was her caseworker for government services for her. I gave her a lot of attention, so she grew fond of me.